This is On Air, and I'm Klara Syrewicz. When Trump won, the stock market soared. 3 months later, there's talk of President's slump, and recession is the global buzzword. What happened? Today, we dissect the administration's economic strategy and its impact on world markets. And in our report, we bid a bitter farewell to revered American media outlets. Many dismissed Trump's tariff threats as mere posturing. In his first term, tax cuts and deregulation outweighed his erratic protectionism. It was the so-called Trump put. The market kept him in check. But back then, he was running for a second term. Now, he hinted at a third, but this being legally impossible and also considering his age, this term is the last and is very much about legacy and revolution. So, the goal is to make America great again. The strategy to overhaul global finance, trade and security. And the tactics, threats, tariffs and military muscle are bargaining chips. The idea behind it is somewhat honorable. US debt is exploding at $36 trillion, with the last surplus dating back to 1999. Interest payments now exceed the entire defense budget. So, Trumpian economists believe they can end the US economy's addiction to borrowing and cheap imports and reset it from being driven by excess money to being driven by actual production, creating jobs for the working class and insulating it from supply chain shocks or treasury sell-offs that can be manipulated, for instance, by China. And the plan is to force the US economy down that path with tariffs leading the way. But a global reset of this scale isn't just complex. It demands time, unflinching resolve, and, ironically, close cooperation with other countries. And among the first conditions for it to happen is for other countries not to retaliate to US tariffs. Obviously, that's not happening. Instead, those countries are regrouping among themselves. Just look at the EU and Canada. Even Trump's top economic ideologist, Stephen Miran, admits it's a tightrope, and he doesn't offer scenarios for what happens if it fails. The second problem is the contradiction in the administration's approach to the dollar. On the one hand, they want the dollar to reign supreme as a global reserve currency because it is the source of American power and leverage. But a strong dollar makes US manufacturing pricier and less competitive, so they also want it to lose value. To achieve this, Miran suggests several countries agree to weaken the dollar by swapping treasury securities and dollars for long-term bonds. A pretty bad deal because they're a bet on US stability, and they can't be traded in markets. Hypothetically, money valuations adjust and tariff countries end up paying more because of what happens to their currencies. So, not only are these countries supposed to not retaliate, but they're also expected to help restructure US debt by being bullied with economic and security threats. Oh, and did I mention that China or hedge funds, which according to the IMF hold 11% of US debt, basically anyone buying US securities, need to be part of this scheme for it to work. Ta-da! That's a lot of wishful thinking and magic math. Now, looking at the volatile, capricious nature of these tariffs so far, they're on, they're off, they're delayed, there's an exemption, it's hard to believe Trump's decisions are part of a grand plan instead of being made on the fly. Which brings us to the third problem. Assuming you want to squeeze concessions, often unrelated to trade policy, like a crackdown on fentanyl precursors in the case of China, or crushing Canada economically to take it over as the 51st state, as Trump explicitly said, the noble idea behind tariffs, rebuilding the US industrial base and creating jobs, is an empty promise. As writer and Cambridge University provost Gillian Tett said in the New York Times, if you want to terrify everyone into submission,
it's just as likely to both terrify everyone else into finding alternatives and hedging their bets and or becoming so discombobulated, if you're a business, that you'll use a classic English word, that you can't actually plan for anything and the economy freezes up.
When you run complex global production chains, you're committing to 5-10-year investments. Relocating even part of your supply from Europe to Texas is expensive. And does that feel safe now? In fact, it feels safer to freeze or cut production and wait for permanent changes, not mood swings.
Protectionism is so seductive because you don't actually see the investments not made. You don't see the people not hired.
That's an opinion from the Cato Institute, a think tank founded by GOP megadonors. But it's not just the US industrial base that senses the chill. Markets have also reacted. On March 10th, Goldman Sachs slashed its 2025 US growth forecast to 1.7%. Inflation expectations are rising, and various banks are increasing recession odds. Add to that Trump signaling he'll interfere with the Federal Reserve's independence, risking more inflation and lost confidence. Meanwhile, the S&P 500, once a juggernaut, is now trailing Europe and China as investors pull money from the US. Europe's stock 600 is up 12% in dollar terms, Germany's DAX by 19%, and China's sluggish Hang Seng rose 17% thanks to AA hype. Even Mexico's IPC index, despite Trump's tariffs, is up 5%. Trump has pulverized trillions of dollars in stock market wealth by injecting extreme uncertainty into the economy. And the standout loser is Tesla stock, which has fallen nearly 40% this year. But Tesla is just one example of many unintended consequences of Trump's policy. From pizza toppings to tourist attractions, American products and services are being boycotted worldwide. In one fell swoop, the US has not only damaged its exports, but also its formidable soft power, the very thing that really made America great all along, the enormous sympathy, respect, and admiration it inspired. There's nothing inherently bad in wanting to reshape your economic model or show some tough love for your allies, but the way you do it seems to make all the difference. The greatest paradox is how some stagnant European industries might find a silver lining, with Trump's tariffs offering them a competitive edge. If you're a US car maker using components crossing borders multiple times, many will be tariffed and not replaced domestically, making production more expensive. But if you're Volkswagen with a plant somewhere in the EU, that won't be a concern. Take the steel tariffs. As former Fed Chairman Larry Summers noticed, there are 60 times as many workers in industries using steel and aluminium than in those producing it. So for the next several years, you're hurting 60 times as many people as you're helping. Economist Kimberly Clausing points out that numerous recent analyses of the first Trump administration tariffs show that roughly all the burden fell on US buyers of imports. As for the fabled tariff revenues, in his first term, Trump spent most of them effectively bribing farmers with welfare payments for the losses incurred by retaliatory tariffs. The Trump team assures Americans that the pain will be worth it. It's an economic detox, and the tariffs will force other countries to offer better deals. Sure, some deals may come along, but if investors' fears about US growth prove true, deals won't offset a recession which will spill over on the global economy. Even if US tariffs temporarily boost some European industries' competitiveness and make our financial markets more attractive, let's not fool ourselves. Everyone suffers in a trade war. Jobs, investments, and businesses on both sides are simply derailed. A weakened ally and key trading partner is bad news for everyone. But Trump sees interdependence as a liability. In his view, America is being ripped off, and he's determined to change things frantically and radically. Gillian Tett has described the revenge politics and the beggar-thy-neighbor tactics endorsed by Trump as taking us back to the 1930s and the prelude to World War II. This shift is so extreme and unfamiliar that it demands equally radical countermeasures, because what Trump has unleashed is not so much America's animal spirit, but mutually assured destruction. Trailing tariffs come budget extinction. The Trump administration, embodied by Elon Musk's Doge, has decided to starve the US Agency for Global Media, overseeing prominent broadcasters like Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and Voice of America. The agency has been a key weapon in the US arsenal to counter censorship, disinformation, and propaganda across the world. We spoke to a former Radio Free Europe journalist who spent 25 years at the outlet about the role it has played in the field of journalism.
This is Radio Free Europe. This is Radio Free Europe. Radio Liberty, Praha.
I was working for Radio Free Europe. I worked to do reports on Central Asia. Anything that was going on there that was of interest, and naturally what we were concerned with was making sure that the people of the region had access to information that was really important to them. So I had to draw on all my experience from not only studying Central Asia, but having lived there in 1992 and 1993 and visited there a couple times since, to find out what did the Central Asian people really need to know about what was happening in their countries and what was happening in the world, that affected them. Well, I mean, obviously this is going to be a big blow for America's image. Again, I've worked with Central Asia, so just speaking about Central Asia in particular, one of the biggest problems I had when I went out there and talked to people and identified myself as being a journalist from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, was that, we had this image that it had carried over from the Cold War. Generally, the West was bad. RFERL was really the CIA, things like that. So now, there's no counterweight to that kind of information anymore. I mean, just today I heard that Chinese radio, for instance, has opened up a service for Pakistan, and they're broadcasting in Pushtun and Urdu. Now, they do the same thing in Central Asia. They're going to broadcast in the local languages in Central Asia. So what information are you going to get if you're listening to Russian sources or Chinese sources in Central Asia? What these radio stations are going to tell you is that democracy is a failure, and that these countries have nothing to offer to a place like Central Asia.
Here's a boy escaped from Hungary when he was 12. Now he brings young Hungarians closer to the world their government censors. Information with a beat.
Folytatva a délutáni rendezvú műsorát következőnek a Drift az együttes és On Broadway.
To give you some extreme examples, there's times where they don't. Turkmenistan, for example, you could have an earthquake, flooding, things like that, and the government won't report it because they don't report bad news. Well, these kind of events affect the people directly. They need to know about this kind of stuff. This isn't a political message. This is just telling them what's going on. If you're living in this area, by the way, you're in danger of flooding, of having floods come and wipe out your house or carry away your car or kill you potentially. The absence of a media organization like RFERL just opens up the space for all the dictatorial countries to move in and tell everybody that listen to your government and just obey what you're told, and don't question the system that you live in because it's absolutely the best suited system for you as a people, and just be happy that you're able to live in a country like the country you live in without questioning if things might be better in some other country, somewhere far away.
Вие сте на вълните на Радио Свободна Европа.
Спирали Радио Свобода.
Эфирда Азатлык радиоһы.
This is Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
Democracy dies not so much in darkness as in silence, and international credibility dies to the sound of Elon Musk's chainsaw. Have a very good weekend, and I'll see you soon.